The legions of Ashfeld ranged in size from a few thousand to almost reaching 1,000,000 in number. The larger legions often had centurions to help train their warriors and soldiers. Centurions, warriors of a bygone age, some say, yet their experience, training, and leadership skills are second to none. Some say that they abandoned their shields that they once carried in ancient days to demonstrate their fearless bravado and fierce determination to never hide from an enemy. Warriors do not cower, behind shields, behind excuses, behind ideals, or behind others. This was the credo of Gaius Verus, the Centurion of Laedric. As a young man, he swore his service to the Lord of Laedric, Maric Borin. Maric had always been a fair man, a decent man, though slow to act. Cautious and fearful to act hastily, that might lead to unnecessary losses. Though Gaius and Maric were friends, Gaius often felt that if Maric simply acted when was necessary, conflicts would be ended more swiftly. You see, Laedric was not a peaceful land. Far from it. Laedric rested close to a Viking village called Skradir. The Vikings of Skradir raided Laedric regularly, and Gaius was always called to fight them off, along with the Laedric Legion. The Vikings of Skradir were tall, vicious, and murderous in their intent. They ran into battle with savage war paint, and their berserkers they commanded were some of the most feral in all of Valkenheim. And yet, Gaius was always prepared to battle and win victories for Laedric. His battle skills were only matched by his martial discipline and leadership. The soldiers under his command not only respected Gaius, they admired him. Gaius led from the front. He was the first warrior into battle. With his gladius in hand, he would gut his foe without blinking, and then strike a charging Viking twice his size. Legend abounded of Gaius and his legendary one-on-one duel with the famous warlord of Skradir, Gradnir. The warlord struck with such savage intensity, but any blow was evaded or parried by the disciplined Gaius. Gradnir would duck behind his shield, which only enraged Gaius further when the warlord would retreat back behind his thick wooden protector. Gaius finally threw his gladius at the warlord, who deflected it with his shield, only to behold the enraged centurion rush him, kick the shield hard, and knock both it and the warlord over. He then grabbed the warlord by the beard, yanking him, screaming to his feet, and then proceeded to beat him furiously with nothing but his fists. Maric rewarded Gaius richly for his deeds, and Gaius Verus became known as a hero to all of Laedric. His name was known throughout the land, and soon most of Ashfeld was hearing legend of the Centurion, who beat down his opponents in mad fury, who detested cowardice in his enemies as well as his men, and who stared down death with a grimace to frighten even a demon. Gaius was more than just a warrior. He was a legend. But it was never enough for Gaius. The war with Skradir was always ever intensifying. For each victory they won over the raiding Vikings, they killed more innocent lives. For each repelled attack on their walls, the walls of Laedric chipped away, and soldiers died at their hands. Soldiers that Gaius had trained and educated. Gaius pleaded constantly for Maric to grant him permission to attack Skradir at their source, to put an end to this feud once and for all. But Maric was firm. To do so would endanger his entire army. Let the enemy break themselves against our fortifications and tire themselves out. In time, they will see the futility of their struggle. But Gaius disagreed. In his eyes, Skradir would never stop, and for years, they never did. Even when the Chimera and Horkos war kicked off, and many Viking clans and knight legions were joining Chimera or Horkos, Skradir still found time to launch campaigns against Laedric. But Gaius would meet them in battle every time, and his ferocity and cunning won him much more praise, admiration, and devotion from his soldiers and the subjects of Laedric. After the Battle of the Eclipse ended and Horkos and Chimera began their recruiting, Skradir had raided Laedric once again and had done near irreparable damage to their outlying crop farms. Gaius saw his chance. The Skradir Vikings were not far off. In a week's time, he could mount a full military counteroffensive and take the fight to the filthy Vikings' home. He would finally see the Skradir city fall, and after a week of planning, preparing, and arming his soldiers for the final offensive, Maric approached with grave news. He was not to attack Skradir, for it was under Chimera protection. You see, the Skradir Vikings had decided to join with the Chimera in their alliance, and Griffin had reached out to Maric as well to ask for his support, ending the feud between their peoples once and for all, and bringing them together to stand against Horkos. It would be a new renewal, a chance for change, and for better unity between their peoples. But Gaius was livid. "How dare you!" he cried. "You would overlook the blood on their hands, the sin in their past, all at the behest of Griffin, at the request of some fossil of the Iron Legion? You coward! Maric, you are a coward! Skradir laughs at us now. With a mere word and a promise of peace, the Vikings of Skradir slink away from punishment without fear, without remorse, and worse, without consequence." But Maric silenced him. "This is as it should be. The feud between our peoples is over. A time of unity is upon us. I suggest you make the most of it." But Gaius stormed out of his lord's presence. He rallied his soldiers, who agreed with him, nearly 3/4 of Maric's forces. He then went forward with his plans and led an attack on Skradir. The battle was furious and vicious. Gaius' soldiers managed to breach the walls of Skradir and invade the city, putting down every Viking in their path. Though they suffered various casualties, they maintained the edge. They were crushing Skradir, putting an end to their enemy. The battle lasted for 2 days. The Skradir Vikings finally put up a fierce defensive front to hold off Gaius. Despite his best efforts, Gaius' men were tired, and Gaius himself was running out of steam. But lo, a beacon of hope at last. As Gaius looked to the south, he saw knights coming towards him, the Laedric Legion. Maric had finally come to his senses and had come to reinforce and aid Gaius. They would destroy their sworn enemy together at last. So, Gaius believed, until Maric gave the order for his men to attack Gaius on the grounds of treachery. Gaius and his soldiers were now being attacked on 2 fronts, from the Skradir Vikings, his mortal foe, and from his own master, Maric of Laedric, and his former soldiers. Gaius could only lament in horror, rage, and fear as he was cornered and his men slaughtered around him in the name of an undeserved, unrespected truce. Gaius, the hero of Laedric and the man admired by almost half of Ashfeld, was defeated, but not killed. A 4th army arrived from the east, unknown to Gaius and his forces. They wore a banner he did not recognize. He had no time to question them or figure out who they were, for the battle had become desperate, and in the thick of the fighting, Gaius had been knocked unconscious. When he awoke, he lay among countless bodies, Viking, knight, and others. He saw his own men dead, and no sign of the Skradir or Laedric Legion. Instead, another force stood before him, comprised of Vikings, knights, samurai, and a few Ulin. And there, standing before all of them, was Astria, the leader of the Order of Horkos. In her dark, tainted armor, she stared down at Gaius Verus and removed her helmet, a rare honor she gave to very few. As she gazed down at the betrayed Centurion, she held out her hand. "On your feet, Centurion." Gaius sneered at her hand and knocked it aside. He then staggered to his knees himself. "Kill me or release me. Do not waste my time with your words, wolf of Horkos," he challenged. Astria then reared back her head and laughed, a barking, venomous laugh. "Spoken like a wolf yourself," she chuckled. "Very well. You're free to go. But what will you do now, Gaius?" Gaius gazed around him at the fallen soldiers, his own fallen men, the ones who believed in him and died for it, the Vikings who he detested and he killed in the name of justice, and the traitorous legions whom Maric turned against him. Then finally, on Astria and her proposal. He then glared up at her, eyes boring into hers. "Why are you here, Horkos?" he demanded. "Because we are war," Astria answered. "We go where the enemy cowers, and we draw them as poison from a wound. We seek out the weak, the pathetic, the idealistic, and the ignorant, and we sever their disease from this world. Is that not why you came here as well, Gaius Verus? They do not come here to crush these cowards where they stood. Those who would abandon their virtues, their way of life, their feuds, all for a pathetic promise like peace. Gaius sneered. He cursed, spat, and then snarled up at Astria. Yes, that is why I came here. Then you are indeed one of us, Astria assured him. Gaius dropped to one knee and bowed his head. I will swear my loyalty to you, Astria, and will join the Order of Horcos. But on one condition alone. Name it. There's a specific disease I must cure from this world. Marek of Laedric. I want his head, he hissed. And Astria smiled at the wolf before her. You will have it, and more. Gaius rose through the Horcos ranks swiftly and mercilessly. He was cruelly efficient, and though surrounded by other capable Centurions like himself, most gave him his space. Gaius was a wolf seeking very specific prey, yet that did not deter him from his duties as a commander. The soldiers under his command in the Horcos order were dutiful, efficient, stalwart, and dependable. Not one would retreat, for doing so meant that Gaius would surely execute them for cowardice. Marek himself was unable to stay in his home in Laedric, as Gaius had attacked there several times with a detachment of Horcos soldiers. Chimera had always come to his aid, but they were met with increasingly severe losses each time, forcing Marek to pack up and flee to safe locations that Chimera offered him. But none of this deterred Gaius. He is a fist of retribution, after all. Another year of hunting and fighting. Finally, Gaius managed to corner Marek and his forces in a pass just within reach of the mire. Backed against the wall, Gaius pushed his way through the Laedric defensive lines towards Marek. And when he finally broke his way through, the old warden stood before him, sword in hand, disdain on his face. Gaius stormed towards him as Marek shook his head. You disappoint me, Gaius. The feeling is mutual. So war-hungry, so crazed for blood. The Chimera Alliance offered us peace. They offered us a chance to end this pointless bloodshed and focus instead on a brighter future. And in exchange for peace, you sacrificed the ideals and principles you swore to uphold for your people, Gaius barked back. Don't preach to me, Marek. Had you laid down your life for this peace of yours, that would have been fine. I would have accepted it. But you did not sacrifice yourself. You sacrificed who you were. There can be no greater cowardice than this. Your soldiers died in countless battles with the Skradir Vikings, and you disgraced every one of them by forging a flaccid peace without a single consequence upon them. And what have you sacrificed, Gaius? Marek asked sorrowfully. You're not the same man I knew years ago. You're now just one of Astria's wolves, another member of her pack. Once you stood as a bastion and a beacon of hope and glory to Ashfeld. Now just another bloodthirsty killer being led by Horkos. What I have done may seem unseemly to you, but what you have become is unsightly to me. Then let me relieve you of your pain, Gaius sneered, raising his gladius. Fight me, Marek! And the two dueled, though the victor was obvious from the start. After a careful striking at Marek's arm, Gaius disarmed his former master and kicked him to the ground. And as Marek lay beneath Gaius, bleeding and in pain, Gaius stood over him and prepared the finishing blow. May you live forever, Gaius Verus, Varric whispered. And for what it's worth, I am sorry. Gaius then plunged his gladius into Marek's chest, killing him. When the Horcos reinforcements stormed the keep, Gaius walked out, hands trembling. Marek's corpse was given a proper burial at Gaius's command, and when Astria asked for Gaius's report, he gave it coolly and calmly. You have your prize, Gaius. I have given you what you wanted, Astria said sharply. Yes, and as I swore to you, I will serve the Order of Horcos till I die. Gaius Verus answered with a bow. Astria sensed the unease in his voice, and then smiled. "He got to you, didn't he, Merrick of Laedric?" Gaius did not answer her. "It is not an easy thing, being torn between empathy and justice. You of course feel sorry for the sheep. You pity their weakness and their clinging to shelter and complacency. They just don't know better. They don't understand the weight of responsibility on the shoulders of the wolves, those of us who understand the wolves." Astria then placed an arm around Gaius' shoulders. "But that cannot change what we are called to do. Apollyon pitied the sheep too, but that did not stop her from doing what needed to be done. You pity your master, you feel for him, but do not let it corrupt your purpose, Gaius." "Yes," Gaius answered. "Who are you?" "I am Gaius Verus, the Iron Hand of Horcos." "And what are you?" "I am a wolf of Horcos." "Then let us not delay, my stalwart Centurion. The iron hand of retribution is needed. Shall we?" Gaius nodded, his convictions reestablished, his mission clear, and his heart set. Chimera would tremble at the name of Gaius Verus, the Iron Hand of Horcos.